How's everybody doing? All right. So today we're going to talk about org buy-in. It's a big subject, but by org buy-in, what we really mean is acceptance and support from management to product to, most importantly, the main audience being engineers, right? So, like I said, a lot to talk about, but I think hoping you'll either find this informative or entertaining. Who knows, right? This is kind of our journey of the past 2 years, and it was a fun ride. Again, Brad Oyler from Philly. Go Phils. Anyone out there? You know, NLCS tonight. There. All right, we got 1, 2. Great. Excuse me. So my background, I've jumped around all different industries, finance, media, logistics, you name it. It's kind of my favorite thing about being a software engineer. You never get bored. So my journey with Gopuff started in 2019 when the org was of roughly 30 engineers, and the business was growing pretty fast. I remember it was like every week, every Friday or every Monday we had like an onboarding. It would be another crop of engineers. It was a fun time. So initially worked on a few different product teams at Gopuff, mostly on the warehousing side, some of the driver routing and things. But being somewhat of a data nerd myself, I typically found myself working on telemetry and observability, monitoring, those types of things. I then became SRE manager about early last year, but we'll get more into that later. So quick overview, a quick outline of topics we'll discuss. Overview of Gopuff, then our kind of get into our journey, SRE, how it started. Third, a little bit about OpenTelemetry. I know we had some good talks yesterday, and try to kind of give us our quick take on that as well. Fourth, incident response, kind of how we turned incident response into a valuable feedback loop through postmortems and tracking metrics around incidents. Fifth, service catalog, and how that really supercharged our automations. Okay, and then we'll get into some Q&A. So keep your questions noted, please. So Gopuff started in 2013 by 2 college roommates in Philadelphia with a mission to create the instant needs market. From a customer perspective, we're an instant delivery service, right? But really we're e-commerce, supply chain, logistics, and a 30-minute delivery company. Now, this is all possible due to our vertically integrated business model where we deliver products from Gopuff operated fulfillment centers, also called MFCs or micro fulfillment centers. All this actually makes Gopuff, working at Gopuff, pretty challenging. Lots of things that can break, lots of problems to solve. So in 2020, we experienced a lot of customer growth. When the pandemic hit, like many of you, engineering had to switch to working remotely. At that time, I was working on the warehouse side, and a focus was scaling and reliability. And focused on that mainly because we were growing leaps and bounds every day. However, we found it very challenging to alert and visualize events with the tool that we had at the time. The main challenges were lots of logs to sift through, Kibana, App Insights, raw logs, etc. Diagnostic logs from services, resources. There's multiple query languages to kind of dig into and learn. It's a tough barrier there to really unify extracting data out. These tools lacked a lot of structure and traceability across services. Another big one was the lack of observability of charts and monitors, sharing charts and monitors with coworkers. I don't know if you've ever gone through that pain of taking a screenshot with no context, like the y-axis is cut off, and you're trying to send that, and you're just like, could you send me a link? Like, I don't know what this data is. A lot of those kind of scenarios, which during an incident gets pretty stressful. Overall, I mean, the bar was just too high for engineers to get a lot of value out of those tools. So, how SRE started. So now it's early 2021. I was challenged with starting the SRE team and at Gopuff and to build a team of engineers to solve the operational issues, reliability, observability, which, by the way, getting more and more costly each day as our growth was going up. Some of the challenges we had specifically were, during incidents, we struggled a lot with lack of observability in general. Like I was saying earlier, it was tough to actually determine customer impact during an incident. This often led to mass confusion, improper mitigations, and longer recovery times, ultimately. We also had a lot of reliance on certain engineers always being on call, which also does not scale. We just had lots of changes going on and very little places to track them accurately. So, the focus for us, we started to build this focus. The main things: observability, incident response, and cloud reliability. We sort of started those. We didn't have enough people on the team to really call those pods, but we had these three focus areas where we tried to drive a goal for each. And to start off, observability really came down to onboarding teams to Datadog, encourage the use of tracing, metrics, and monitors. Incident response was really bring teams into PagerDuty, iterate on that process end to end, make it better, less painful, get better at postmortems, and use that as a valuable feedback loop to improving. Then, of course, cloud reliability. It's a very broad bucket, but I mean, this allowed us to push on certain projects and help other teams either complete those projects, or we would take on those projects as well, such as Cloudflare, edge protection, WAF enablement, high availability on certain cloud resources. And of course, a big one was our Kubernetes adoption at that point, trying to move a lot of our legacy, 2-year-old services legacy over to Kubernetes was a big project. 2 key motivations. Well, visibility of all critical services that ran our business, and 2, needing to better understand how disruptions affected our customers and bottom line. So this led us to, as I was saying, bring in Datadog and kind of get our feet wet. So the first action was kind of enabling all those integrations for our clouds. We were fortunate enough to have not 1, not 2, but 3 clouds. So this happened through acquisitions. So that was extra fun. So just trying to get observability across all this thing, all these different environments was a challenge. But the cloud metrics and integrations from Datadog were a huge help. They gave us enough to kind of get excited about and start sharing charts, onboarding teams, creating some monitors. It also allowed SRE to also create some more aggressive monitoring on key shared resources like service bus, databases, to try to create that initial signal or initial indicators. So second, log pipelines from Azure Diagnostic Logs. So there's a lot of things that are lacking from these cloud metrics. So we needed to get more granular detail from the diagnostic logs. So one of the app gateways, for instance, we would pull in all the app gateway diagnostic logs, allowed more granular so we could actually pinpoint endpoints. So error rate, latency on specific endpoints in that infrastructure. This also was a huge, as well as service bus and databases, and using the PagerDuty and also Slack integrations to alert on, right? So pro tip, if you are ingesting logs from Azure, I would highly suggest using the US3 Datadog account, because that has the Azure partner integration. However, we did not go down that road. So we suffered some hoops to jump through, but we got it done, and it's still going today. And yeah, but feel free to talk to me about the struggles with that. But next, metrics from logs. So like I said, we're pulling in all these logs from Azure, from AWS, GCP. Now logs are short-lived, 15-day retention. So to get more useful and finer grained signals or indicators, metrics from logs were a huge help. Just like I was saying with the app gateway logs, to actually create those SLOs for week and month, by turning those indicators into SLOs, we're actually able to see which specific endpoints or services were degrading over a week or month time range. The next step was kind of, once we got that far, I would say we have a lot of data. It was really kind of, being more diligent about our tagging. So cleaning up tagging across all those cloud resources, environment variables, coming up with good conventions, tiers, things like this, to really be able to focus in alerting on these resources. Team, you name it. Custom metrics. Now, this, so custom metrics were super valuable. They really became sort of our, and I'll explain in the next slide, but they really started to become our key indicators for when our customers were having an impact. So here's two custom metrics. We've got, at the top, we've got orders placed and orders delivered. Now, these two were actually the first two metrics we sort of set up. I can get more into like the technical side of it. Pretty simple. It's basically, we had a function app that wrote these custom metrics on Node.js using the Datadog metrics NPM package. But essentially, we're consuming off of the service bus for these events. And they're, like I said, fairly straightforward. But they provide very handy during releases and also during incidents. As you can see above, this is actually an example of an incident that started at 1500, and you can see that dropped below the anomaly band. So by using this, we could then trigger a metric once we see that drop below the anomaly band. What's also interesting is you can use this for SLOs as well. So you can use a monitor. So if you create a monitor off this data, that monitor could then be used as a way to track downtime of this metric. So like I said, the red line, and you can see here at the bottom, the orders delivered are fine at that point. So now we'll go ahead and look about an hour in the future. We've kind of recovered. The panic has settled. We're starting to think about when we're going to schedule this postmortem. But this has some interesting data here as well. You can kind of see that drop. So this incident was actually a problem with our payment gateway. And you can see that drop to almost nothing. And then all of a sudden we recovered, where that's basically users like retrying, and then finally can get their orders in. So that's why we have that spike above the anomaly band. But what's also interesting is that you can see, because of that lag, or because of the loss of orders, we can also see the dip in deliveries, kind of like in a delay, which is interesting. We also would alert on that. So Fortunately, that's a scenario where we would probably have this go off and then another alert kind of say, hey, the delivers are down as well, but that's sort of a lagging indicator. Okay. So as we started to gradually improve our visibility with logs and metrics, we still struggled with time to recovery. And we knew we needed more observability and structure across our services that were growing rapidly day by day. Our main goal was to create common conventions across our 60 plus teams, which used 4 different runtime environments. Also, as you may know, OpenTelemetry or OTel is a collection of tools and standards used to instrument and generate telemetry data within your applications. We made the decision to adopt OTel because it was painfully obvious we needed some open standard we could proliferate across the org and feel good about it for the long term. The fact that it had great support from CNCF and was vendor neutral really helped make it easier for product teams to join in on this effort. We knew it wouldn't help just by us saying, go and install these, include these in your app. We had to get all the engineering tech leads and managers kind of on board. So this led us to create our own library called PuffTelemetry, or set of libraries called PuffTelemetry, as an opinion set of wrappers around metrics, tracing, and logging. So this is pretty much what it looked like. So we had 4 actual packages, still have. We're looking to open source these shortly. So we have Node.js, Go, Java, and Python currently. And essentially these contain, like I said, tracing for OTel services, OTel libraries, structured logging. So by structured logging, some of the standard logging that you'll do in Go isn't structured. So we take those as opinions, right? We'll count those as opinions and say, okay, let's use something like Zap in Go. In Node.js, we used Winston. So this kind of, as SRE, I don't love logs, but they're needed. But making these kind of opinions or as a standard across makes things just easier to support and kind of makes those decisions for developers. And with Node.js and JavaScript, there's just so many choices to make. So lowering that overhead is a big help. And also kind of reduces the amount of libraries that we have to support as an organization. Third, standard tagging. Standardized tagging help enforce naming conventions. Pretty straightforward. And last, custom metrics. So using PuffTelemetry, we're able to kind of enforce a standard API and a telemetry schema to some degree for custom metrics. Again, the fact that OTel was open source and vendor neutral definitely helped adoption. It relieved fears of having to rework these services, a year or 2 down the line. When we first launched, we actually stood up our own OTel collector because this was previous to actually Datadog supporting OTLP ingestion. And now we're moving over to actually using Datadog agent to ingest the OTLP or the OpenTelemetry traces and metrics. All right, so now we're getting into the incident response. Sorry, I think we're gonna have Q&A at the end. Just hold, yeah. I do want to hear your question though. So another stream of work we were pushing on was incident response. So our incident process of 18 months ago was essentially like a Slack command that notified a bunch of engineers, created a Zoom call. It was all through kind of like a Slack channel. Pretty basic. but we then manually create a doc for postmortem, like after, sometimes, right? Sometimes you would, sometimes if it was a 2 in the AM, it was hard to kind of like, who's going to follow up? It was always just a struggle. But so we definitely grew out of that process for sure. And it lacked tracking and ability to see frequency of events, let alone even any tracking on our time to recovery. It also didn't allow for engineers to declare lower severity events, right? Or incidents. So, it by not allowing that, you sort of make those smoldering fires that are happening across your org less visible, and that doesn't help because there's a good amount of those Sev3 incidents for us where maybe we don't want to page SRE or our cloud engineering team, but we sort of want everyone to know about it and start kind of putting together data, putting together what's going on there, and following it through to being resolved. So this all was the motivation for Puff incident. There's an obvious pattern of naming conventions happening here, right? I think a lot of our systems that are like front end focused or customer are Go, and then all of the back end fun stuff is Puff, right? So what was that? So yeah, like I was saying, this is the motivation. So we still kind of leverage the Slack command, but what we did is create our own service called Puff Incident, which is actually an HTTP API as well. Something that we can, when we run through a Slack command, we can then spawn, like we can create our own Datadog incident and also a PagerDuty incident, and also Zoom call, a bunch of different things based off of this form. Now you can see the inputs here. Obviously, a description. Severity is key, and especially spelling out the severity, because when your org is growing, not maybe 20, 30% are going to know all the severity levels. So trying to spell that out is key. Also, some other, being able to post to other Slack channels, and the impacted service, which ties into our service catalog. That is also key for automations and paging certain on-call schedules. Cool. Okay, so here is the custom notification that gets sent out to the Slack channels I was referring to. There's a lot going on here, but at the top you can see the description, severity, and the link to the Datadog and PagerDuty incident, and also the Zoom call. At the bottom, we also list any of the teams that were notified. And of course, below the fold, there's more going on. We could potentially automate posting, like what we do actually, we post the last 10 releases, or sorry, all the releases that happened in the last hour. The ingress, if that service has an ingress, we'll post the SLO or the error rate for that ingress. And also the order volume. So that chart, the custom metric that we looked at earlier, that chart will also to see if there's an impact to order volume or orders delivered. So this kind of like sets the table for the incident, and we're constantly improving this and trying to get, all that information into one spot where we can reduce that overhead for getting to the root cause or getting to a way to mitigate the incident. So this is the Datadog incident that gets created, which is interesting. So there's a couple things to kind of point out here. One is the detection method. This is obviously key for whether you're going to, whether this was a monitor or an employee or a customer service call, because obviously if it's not a monitor, we want to know why it wasn't and why we have humans saying something's broken. That's always something you want to avoid, and try to take pride in that. Obviously, the customer impact is key. You can see here 21-minute customer impact. So this is really what helps drive, I guess, the priority of the follow-up items, and also allow us to track that MTTR, or time to resolution. And at the bottom we have trigger. This is something we added. It's a custom field, which is pretty handy. But this kind of points out whether this was our own doing. So if it was a release, then it was us, right? But a lot of times it's a payment gateway, it's a third party, it's a cloud outage. Decided to reboot your database in the middle of the night for unknown reasons. These things happen, but it's not tracking them. It makes it much harder to kind of point out these trends, right? So once we have this in a resolved state, this is actually completed, meaning that we've done the postmortem. But once we do have this in a resolved state, that's when we go ahead and schedule the postmortem and go through that process, which I could probably spend another hour talking about that. But okay, so now we have our service catalog. This is sort of our newest initiative right now. Honestly, something I wish we would have started 3 years ago or 2 years ago. But we started to really focus on the service catalog as a need for automation. It was really tough to kind of automate when you don't have good structure in place and you don't know all the services that are out there. You don't know who owns them. So during the rapid growth, we also had a rapid growth of services, right? So we needed to understand and also the criticalness of each of those services, which we called tiers. So we put them in tiers to kind of tier 1 and tier 2 are top tier services, and those affect the customer purchases or deliveries or moving things in the warehouse. That would stop the whole event flow. So and also another point on this is finding out, when you have teams moving around and teams growing, services tend to get orphaned, right? So finding those, I'm sure you've all experienced this, where it's like, who owns this service? Oh, well, that was this team, and so that's a big part of the service catalog as well. We call this service sprawl. It's just really tough to stay on top of it. And to be honest, one of the main points of stress, I would say, when you're kind of going through site reliability is not knowing who owns what, and not having this also allows us to do a lot of automations. So previous, when I was saying with Puff Incident, when you select that service, it would automatically, that's all done through the PagerDuty event orchestrations, actually, in conjunction with our service catalog. So whenever a new ingress would get added to our Kubernetes, like Nginx, for example, that would automatically update our event orchestration in PagerDuty. That would then alert the proper team instantly, instead of us having to wait on the call and say, okay, this service is spiking. Who owns this, or things like that, because that is just that is painful downtime. Cool. So I guess to get further, got 1 minute left. Just going to jump into like the lessons learned here. Number 1, don't wait to automate. Like I was saying, and definitely wished we had the service catalogs sooner, but waiting for the perfect constraints. It's not just true because it rhymes. It's true because you can learn from it, right? It helps you actually learn. It's hard to say like, oh, we're missing this data or this data. Once you actually try to automate and take it seriously, then you realize, okay, we need this in place. And you don't always need a perfect system or some perfect schema to get that done. A lot of the tools we used for our service catalog are somewhat temporary, things like Airtable and Confluence, but We want to replace them at some point with Backstage, things like that. But yeah, again, another talk. So going back to the end-to-end testing, like actually testing incident response, that's an interesting one. So most wouldn't think about it, but it's a software system, right? So actually enabling certain things you can shut off and on so people don't get paged is key. So we can add features to it, and we're always sort of iterating on that process. So having a test process, and also when things are down, like what happens to your incident response process? Is that down as well? Because now you're scrambling and no one knows who to call. You know, you're picking up the phone. More stress. Logs are useful, right? But we really want to move towards metrics and traces. Join the OTel initiative. It's a great community. It's a thriving project, I would say right now. A year ago, it was kind of yet to be seen, but I think now it's got widespread adoption. Everyone here is talking about it. So I think it's a pretty exciting thing. Encouraging engineers to declare more incidents. I know this sounds counterintuitive, but those SEB3 incidents, ways to collect that information and expose that to the rest of the org to see what's going on and to add that to your tracking. If certain teams or certain lines of business are having a lot of frequent like SEB3 outages, it's maybe a small percentage, but why is it always because of releases? Like maybe there's indicators there that you can learn from. So create more incidents. Full service ownership. So this has really kind of, we have a very small SRE team, I would say. So full service ownership, we were pretty much ahead of that. But it's really allowed the SRE team to kind of focus on these automations instead of always supporting services. We encourage teams in a lot of ways to own their services and to do as much as they can to mitigate, track the incidents, and run postmortems. And we're involved, but I think this really, one of the key things that helps create a culture of ownership and accountability. And that's my talk. Thanks everyone here, and thanks to the team for building all this awesome stuff. And we can start the Q&A.
Wonderful. Big round of applause for Brad, please. Thank you, Brad. We do have a microphone set up over there, but I can also come to you. So who's got a question? Probably have time for a couple. So the question is, works for an org with just kind of a mess of teams. How do you start to standardize when you're dealing with chaos, essentially?
Right. So obviously, if you're talking about logs from applications, using something like a wrapper to enforce tagging and structured logs as opposed to just sending raw data, that's a big step forward. Especially when it comes down to environments, the service tier, and also like the service owner, or having those tags on logs. But when you're talking about logs from like all different types of like cloud resources. Yeah, it's I would say, again, push for structured logging. And Datadog actually has a lot of has the log pipelines. So what you can do is take those non-structured logs and turn them into, you can use the Grok parser. We use that a lot. So the key to that is just making sure you have the proper source on those logs, and then when they come into Datadog, you can basically parse those logs and do all kinds of, we've done all kinds of crazy things with those, especially with Nginx logs, where it was very tough to enforce Nginx logs to be structured on every single Nginx app. So kind of gave up on it and said, well, we'll pull them in raw, and then we'll parse them to create structured. And then from there, you use the metrics from logs, and that's where you can create your SLOs, your more granular monitors and things like that.
All right. I think we have one more question here.
Okay, I'll try. I'm bad at like microphone distance. As an
Same.
organization that's sort of new to SRE, how do you prioritize action items from postmortems?
Okay, I can take you through that a little bit. So kind of our process when we have a postmortem, that is like the key output. I mean, yes, we wish we could solve all world's problems with our postmortems, but really we try to have a few action items. And what we'll do is required at the postmortem to create a JIRA. Okay, not to get too specific, but help visualize it. We create a JIRA, we label those, and we have the teams, the tech leads, actually create those JIRAs, right? And so whoever's responsible for service X, they go in, create the JIRAs, and then SRE will actually follow up on that postmortem JIRAs. And we kind of, nudge them every once in a while, try to set severity on those things based on the incident severity. We'll set severity typically, but yeah, it's important to, and that's a tough road. It doesn't start off all, roses. So, but yeah, if you don't do it, you're not going to get better at it. So yeah, I think, and that's one area we definitely got a lot better. It's great to see too. It's great to see teams like have that ownership and start fixing stuff. Yeah.
All right, time for one quick one.
Yeah, in your journey, you were talking about getting teams to implement Datadog in different metrics within their app or their services. How did you get teams to actually buy in inside your company? Like, how do you get teams to take the time to configure and to do all the hard steps?
Example is number one, but of course, like the PuffTelemetry package we created, we sort of just lowered the bar for them to make it easier. So it's like, hey, try this package out, put it into your development environment, and then we'll help. We have tons of dashboards and examples and code examples too, how to track custom metrics within that. And it's that API, because we're using those same PuffTelemetry packages, is same across all 60 teams that are using it, right? They're all the same. So we have a support channel. If they have a question in Slack, they'll come in and we can, because we have knowledge of this package, it's kind of like it's a back and forth. Instead of saying, oh, I don't know, how are you doing it now? And getting into this long conversation in 5 meetings, it's like, we know you're using this package, you're using this version. Yeah, we can help you figure that out. But it's a little hand holding, but after that, it's you get that velocity.
Awesome. Well, thank you everyone for the great questions. I recently had a conversation with one of our SREs, and he said something that I think applies here, which is that effective SRE is sometimes a function of company size and scale. It takes money and a lot of resources to be able to implement it effectively. So I think kind of got a sense of that during the journey. So one more round of applause for Brad Oyler, SRE manager from Gopuff. Thank you.